why we're running this program. And we've got Ian with us, and we might actually get Ian just to sort of give us the 30-second spiel around METS Ignited. This is normally what I would talk through, but you're here, so we may as well get you to do that bit.
Sure. Now?
Yep.
Okay, so METS Ignited is one of the 6 industry growth centres that was set up by the current federal government, although 2 of them, including METS Ignited, came out of the previous federal government's activities. But all of us have 4 key objectives. One, to accelerate the rate of commercialisation of technology. So we don't get involved so much in research, but we are heavily involved in taking existing technology or prototyped or minimum viable products and putting them, helping them get into the customers and then into the market generally. We're looking to improve or enhance the business and management capability of METS companies, in particular how to deal nationally and internationally. Thirdly, we want to grow exports, and fourthly, there is a regulatory environment activity that we need to address. In the METS and mining sector, it's essentially the difficulties working across state borders. That's mostly the main regulatory difficulties. We've put together a regulatory roadmap, which is now with the federal government, which gives them an idea of where we think they should be focusing. The accelerators, and there are 2 types. There's these regional accelerators, and then there's a larger sort of scale-up accelerator, which occurs once a year. The reason for those is because it basically helps the commercialization, but it also does a lot for enhancing business capability. Because if we want to be dealing internationally these days, we've really got to understand what are the tools and techniques that business are using around the world. And a lot of the METS industry has come out of the traditional sectors, and therefore we need to update, upgrade, and help people understand what to get out of the accelerators. So that's why we open this both to startups and also to existing small and medium-sized companies, because an existing company with a new innovation can often do much better considering that innovation as like a little startup project, rather than just another product into their existing portfolio. How's that? Is that good enough for the moment, Joy?
Perfect, and it even worked with my slides, so spot on, Ian.
Okay, thank you
very much. All right, so just a quick recap from last week for those who weren't here. And Orlando, when you've got access, the video from last week is available through our Slack channel, and we'll make sure, I think you've been sent a link, but we'll make sure you've got access to that as well, so you can go back and watch that. But last week we did introduce the Lean Canvas as a tool that's quite helpful when we're starting to think about new projects, and particularly identifying what the problem is that our potential customer has and thinking about it from their perspective. So we looked at the tool and those 2 elements, so either side, the left and right ends, the problem and the customer. And then we talked about the fact that our customer may actually be multi-layered. So we might deal with someone who is going to be making, the economic decision about buying the actual item and paying for it, someone who might be the decision maker in terms of the technical abilities of what we're offering, but also someone who influences those and or influences the end user of the product. So often with larger organizations in particular, those people can be quite separate from each other and approach the problem with completely different opinion and from a completely different viewpoint. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well, when we're talking about the value proposition. But when we were looking at that from the problem perspective, we also wanted to make sure that we understood why it was important to validate our assumptions around who that customer is or who we think it may be and the problem that they have, and how important that is, particularly in terms of, the statistics we see around businesses failing or new products within a new business failing is often around the fact that we've relied on our assumptions without validating that enough and not having good quality conversations with the right people. Also being sure that wherever possible, we are finding, you know, a decent sized market to serve. We can certainly solve a problem for one person or one situation, and that's nice, but it does not make a business unless there's a decent sized market that we can actually tap into to make sure that we can remain viable into the future as well. And we certainly don't want to waste time and money building something that nobody will pay for. So we want to make sure that our customer not only wants the product but has a willingness and a capacity to pay. So that is a very brief summary of what we talked about last week. But this week I do want to jump into just basically an introduction to the topic that we'll cover this week with our mentors as well. And the first part of that is around product market fit and finding value within that. So one thing that you may be familiar with is a term of unique value proposition. And when we break that down, we often are thinking about, you know, what is the task that our customer is doing, but what are the pains and gains that they have in relation to doing that, and can we actually pull it apart and really drill down into what's the situation, and do we understand that well enough to then be able to approach it in a way that we can talk about the value it will provide them. So our objective this week is not right now, but for you to work on during this week, is to actually work through listing out what those are. So those assumptions we have around the issues, the problems, and what someone's wanting to achieve. So what issues they're trying to solve, what they're wanting to achieve, and actually doing the job that they're doing that you're going to help them do by providing a solution. And we want to be able to make sure that any features that we're looking to incorporate into our solution are actually clearly addressing those pains or gains. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So that when we communicate with someone, we can use the words that they understand that make it relevant to the person that we're talking to. And again, we're still potentially needing to have multiple versions of that, depending on whether we're talking to that end user customer or the decision maker or the economic buyer, because again, their problem is often different, even though the end product is the same. So when we're looking at our lean canvas now, we're actually looking at that middle section around unique value proposition and still our customer. So looking at those two things, we'll see that solution is there, and we'll definitely be looking at solution as well. But unless we understand enough about the problem, if we're just fixed on our solution at this stage, we're generally just trying to push what we think someone wants onto them, as opposed to actually understanding what it is that they need and then developing a solution that's going to help actually resolve the problem. So that's why I just want to be quite clear that it is still really about understanding the problem and how we can provide value without necessarily focusing on that solution just yet. We will, but not just yet. The other thing is there are lots of people that we can talk to, and when we're spending our time and energy and potentially some money having these conversations with people to find a product market fit, we want to make sure that we are talking to those people who would be our ideal customer. And we may have to talk to, you know, normally I use the term a lot of frogs to find the prince, but you know, you may have to talk to lots of different people to find those people. But when we look at who that ideal customer would be, it is someone who actually cares about the problem and is looking for a solution. Again, has that willingness and capacity to pay, because otherwise they're not going to be a customer. There might be a charity, but not a customer. They also have to be in a part of the market that you can access. And one of the benefits of this program and having these mentors involved is the fact that that's reaching your network further out than you perhaps have done so far. So making sure that you are looking for channels to be able to access that market all the time and expanding your own reach and your own language to get into where you need to go. Also looking for people who've previously paid for a Band-Aid, and we talked about that a little bit last week in terms of the problem, but what are they doing to solve that problem? What's that existing alternative that somebody is utilising at the moment? It might not be ideal, and in fact it probably isn't, or maybe it's just a slap together, you know, whatever. or it might be not safe, or it might be very expensive, or it might be, you know, fraught with a whole lot of other problems, or doesn't integrate. But what are they doing at the moment? Because if they're already spending on something, they're probably more likely to, you know, be able to move those funds across to a new solution, as opposed to somebody who's not, you know, not already doing it at all. And then the other thing, and particularly as we start to talk about new products, and we talk about prototyping a little bit later today, but someone who's willing to help design the solution and co-designing that solution and working with you to actually create something that's going to work for them, but also potentially work for others as well in the industry. So someone who's willing to be part of that process is a really good ideal customer in the beginning, and being quite, I guess, intentional in your conversations in the early stages, and getting a feel for the people that you're dealing with and how responsive they are to that mutual growth is really important. So just having all those things in mind when you're starting to have these conversations, because if you've got someone who you're having to try and convince them that they've got this problem, they're not your ideal early stage customer. They might become a customer later on, and that's fine, but if it's hard work to deal with them now, they're not usually the right people to work with, because it will take your energy and potentially time and money in excess of what you've got at the moment. So we want to do those things to be able to progress to the second stage of our validation board. So we looked at this last week as well, and we were talking about our customer and problem in that first column of the start. We definitely have to make sure that we're talking to somebody who has the problem. But again, those initial stages is not talking about the solution. As we move forward, though, we need to introduce the solution conversation in that co-design process. But again, it's no point talking to somebody who doesn't have the problem about the solution. We need to make sure we're understanding that full connectivity part. So if we've had this conversation with someone and started to build a relationship and they do have the problem, then we can start talking about potential solutions, whether it's co-designing it or introducing it if you've already got it prototyped and tested. But again, we've got all of these assumptions that we're making about that person and the way they deal with the problem and the solutions that they've tried in the past, what worked for them and what didn't work for them, what they're doing at the moment, and what they like and don't like about it, what's causing them a problem, what do they want to achieve that this particular solution they've got at the moment is not letting them achieve. You know, where's that line, where's that barrier for them? So we have all these assumptions about that, and again, we need to now extend our ability to have that conversation and find those things that we think are most important, and then find out whether the other parties think they're equally important, and then focus on the things that are, because if we're focusing on the things that are lower on their priority list and don't cause them as much pain, they're probably less likely to want to actually engage with you, because they don't see that as being something worth solving. Where if you can actually identify from your assumptions what equally they agree are bigger issues or more painful issues, sometimes there's going to be quick wins in there, and they might be the slightly lower, but they're quick win and they build relationship. But generally, we want to make sure that it's those things that are really, really important to them, that they need solved, and you are that conduit to get them a solution. So listing out those assumptions and identifying a method again of how can you test the validity of your assumptions, and being quite analytical in the outcome of that, and trying to avoid the bias that we bring with it, because we're passionate about it. We bring our own bias, but being analytical about the outcome of those conversations or the outcome of those experiments to see what is worth working on now and what needs to be maybe left till later or disregarded altogether. So using this type of tool, and again, a spreadsheet works just fine. You don't have to have the actual, board printed as such, but thinking about those things. Okay, if we've refined through conversation who our customer is, we've narrowed that down to be a more ideal early stage client. We've refined the problem that we can really identify and pinpoint as close as we can. What is that problem? But now we're talking about how do we start to introduce that solution conversation in co-designing something where possible. So the other thing that's really important is why you, and you need to be confident in yourself and your abilities, but you also, you know, depending on where you're coming from, there may be things that you've done before and things that you haven't done before. So being able to talk about yourself, and obviously I just had you all introduce yourselves, but being able to talk about the level of experience and authority that you do bring, but also being willing to be a little bit vulnerable in talking about what you're still yet to learn. Because if you can recognize that and be able to articulate that with your client or your early stage customer in the beginning, it can help them understand how they can be involved in the process. They may have experience, and you know they've got the experience that you don't have, but by working together mutually, you can grow whatever needs to be grown, and bring, you know, it might be data, it might be personnel, it might be resources, it might be, you know, access to a testing site, you know, whatever it is that you don't have. You know, how do you talk about that as well as, you know, the great things that you do have and the experience you do have and your passion for the problem, and then bring those together. So being able to talk about that is also really important in coming up with something that then becomes what we call a unique value proposition. So being different, if you're just doing something that's the same as what, you know, every other place is doing, then, you know, you've got a whole lot of competition and there's nothing unique there about it. But if you are bringing something that is unique, you know, it might be your team, it might be your experience, it might be, you know, where you're willing to go, what you're, you know, what you're doing. It could be new, like particularly, you know, hydrogen. I'm not saying hydrogen is new because obviously it's been around for a while, but what we're starting to do with it, you know, if those things are new and no one else is doing them yet, then highlight those points within your value proposition. Obviously, only talking about the things that someone else sees value in is also really important. If you talk about all the little, you know, the little nice to haves, and all they care about is this, you know, this big chunky problem that they've got, they're not going to align with you and not see that common value. So making sure we really do understand those core things that that person wants to achieve and how we can bring that into our conversation. And then the other thing, a unique value proposition, it's a proposition, it's a statement, but it's also a suggestion of what action you can take. Just telling them what you've done in the past isn't enough. You have to be able to communicate what you're doing and what you're planning to do as well, and how they can be involved in that journey. So again, you know, there's a reason you're going to them. There's a reason that you feel that the two of you can work together. What is that, and how can you articulate that as well? And then, you know, do it succinctly, often in those early stages. And today you're going to have the opportunity to speak with our mentors for, you know, 20 minutes or so, but you still need to get to the point. You know, what are you looking for, and why would someone engage with you, and how do you want to move forward with them? So the more clear we can be about that, the more likely we are to be able to move forward with someone on a similar path to us, as opposed to, again, that battle to drag someone along with us on the journey that we want to go on. So hopefully that makes sense. I realise it's quite short. Normally for me, this would be like a 1 hour workshop on its own and we'd go through some exercises. But that's the part that we want to get you thinking about and working with, and being clear about what you want and what you need, so that when you're having conversations with the mentors today, and then certainly with customers going forward, you can start to articulate that. So another tool that we use, and sorry, probably covered a little bit of this so far, but another tool we use is a thing called a value proposition canvas. And it actually helps to break this down and gets you thinking about these different elements quite independently. And again, the assumptions that you have about those. But the first thing is, you know, what's that job your customer's actually trying to do? And again, when we're thinking about our different levels of customers, that's really important. But what do they want to achieve? So what's important to that actual person that you're talking to? Their organisation, yes, and they probably align with their organisation's goals, or at least we hope they do. That makes it easier to initiate a conversation. But for that individual person, they're still a person. They have something they want to achieve or they need to achieve. So we need to identify what that is, what pains and gains are linked to their particular job that they're trying to do, and then what do you believe you can do to help them. So the value proposition canvas breaks it into two sides. The circle side is all about your customer. The square side is all about your product. And what we need to do is find the linkages between the two. There is a little video that will play and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Can you hear?
Every day, companies design products and services to improve their customers' lives. But 72% of new product and service innovations fail to deliver on expectations. This means that customers don't care about...
Okay, sorry, I'll just... Yeah. Should be...
Every day, companies design products and services to improve their customers' lives. But 72% of new product and service innovations fail to deliver on expectations. This means that customers don't care about 7 out of 10 new products introduced to the market. It doesn't have to be this way. Just like you create value for your business with a business model canvas, there is in fact a tool to intentionally visualize, design, and test how you create value for customers. It's called the Value Proposition Canvas. The Value Proposition Canvas is composed of 2 parts, the customer profile and the value map. With the customer profile, you describe the jobs your customers try to get done. Jobs can be functional, like getting from A to B, social, like impressing friends and colleagues, or emotional, like gaining peace of mind. You highlight your customers' pains, which annoy customers while trying to get a job done. Pains are negative outcomes that customers hope to avoid, like dissatisfactions with existing solutions and challenges, frustrations, risks, or obstacles related to performing a job. And you outline customer gains, which describe how customers measure the success of a job well done. Gains are positive outcomes that customers hope to achieve, like concrete results, benefits, and even aspirations. Use the customer profile to visualize, test, and track your understanding of the people or companies you intend to create value for. It's a map that becomes clearer the more you learn about your customers. The second part of the canvas is the value map. With it, you list the products and services your value proposition builds on. You describe in which way these products, services, and features are pain relievers, how they eliminate, reduce, or minimize pains customers care about, making their life easier. And you outline in which way they are gain creators, how they produce, increase, or maximize outcomes and benefits that your customers expect, desire, or would be surprised by. The value map makes explicit how your products and services relieve pains and create gains. Use it to design, test, and iterate your value proposition until you figure out what resonates with customers. You achieve fit by creating a clear connection between what matters to customers and how your products, services, and features ease pains and create gains. Great value propositions target essential customer jobs, pains, and gains, and do so extremely well. Your customer profile may contain countless jobs, pains, and gains, but your value map highlights which ones you intend to focus on. But don't forget, an outstanding value proposition can still fail if your business model is flawed. Successful companies embed outstanding value propositions in scalable and profitable business models. Use the value proposition canvas to create products and services that customers want. Get started at strategizer.com.
All right, so the reason I like that particular tool is that it does actually get you to really try and separate out the two sides. So your customer and focus on what they feel, what they need, and then actually thinking about, how does your product align? And when we talk about those different layers of customer, where, we might be looking at an economic buyer. So their main job might just be to stay within budget. That's what they need to do. That's the job that they have. A decision maker, though, might be looking at the product's capability, but also, and the production that they have, what they can produce, but also they might be looking at their team's safety. You know, that's what they're responsible for. That's their job. And then the end user might be someone in the field. Well, their job might be just to produce whatever it is within their KPI. That's what they have to do. And, you know, a variety of different jobs, but they have to perform and they have to reach a certain productivity level. And they're happy, you know, to engage. They don't care necessarily what it costs. They might have a certain amount of responsibility for that. They obviously probably care about their own safety and the safety of the others, but it's not their responsibility necessarily to do that. They have to get the job done. So it's really thinking about who you're having a conversation with. So then if we think about what matters to them, for that economic buyer, they might be looking for something like a simple negotiation process and straightforward contracting and good payment terms. The decision maker, though, might be looking for the reliability of the product, so it's track record. It might be looking at how it integrates into other systems, the learning curve, how much time they're going to have to invest into training staff, you know, what the warranty is if it fails, and you know, how happy are their team going to be. At the end user, they care about how easy is this to learn, how easy is it to use, is it comfortable, is it, you know, efficient, does it help them actually get their job done, is it reliable, is it safe for them to use, you know, does it weigh a lot or a little, does it smell bad, you know, whatever it might be. They're the one using it at the end of the day. So they're the one who cares about those things, where the economic buyer probably couldn't care less if it smelled bad, you know, except for the fact that they might get some complaints along the way, or at least the decision maker usually is in the middle there. So it's really thinking about those things. So when you as the producer of a product or a service that's going out to someone, you have to be able to cover all of those things, but you don't need to talk about all of those things with every person that you talk to, unless of course it's a one-man show. Then maybe you do, because it might be the same person wearing multiple hats, but generally it's going to be different people within an organization. So unless you can understand all the different layers, you're not going to hit the mark, and that then obviously becomes an issue when it comes to someone buying from you again. So this I'm not going to go through, I'll just share the slides afterward, but there's a whole lot of different questions that you need to think about in terms of what are your customers' pains. And again, you make some assumptions about these, but you need to be able to test them. And the more conversations you can have with people who are actually the customer, the more likely you are to start to see what's common and what's important, and then realize what to focus on. And similarly for the gains, there's a whole lot of different questions that you can ask and think about to be able to make sure you're addressing those things that they want to be able to achieve. But you can't be everything to everyone. Okay, so you can't do that. So they might have, you know, hundreds of different pains that they want solved. Again, you have to find the ones that matter the most, and then also the ones you can deliver on. And that may come with time, and particularly if you're working on something new, it may take some time to work through what that is and actually having a solution that works. So being able to come up with a statement, something you can say. So when you're invited to do a 30-second introduction, you've got a spiel. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is who we help. This is how we do that. This is what we achieve for them. So looking at that end result, what does that end picture look like for somebody? If you can paint that picture, then they're more likely to go, okay, happy to talk to you about that. Or maybe I'm not your customer, but I know someone who is, and you should go talk to Jim because, you know, he's the guy that has that problem and he's looking for that solution. So being able to articulate that really well is really important, and the clearer you can be. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to work through that right now today, but it is an exercise that I encourage you to do, and obviously we can help you with that one-on-one as required. So then finally, I just want to touch briefly on, you know, designing a solution. And I know for some of you, you've already got something that you are, you know, working on. And if you're already working with a potential customer and getting pilots in place and things, that's great. If you're not, then, you know, this will be something that's more, you know, maybe more relevant. But the solution section, it's not that you don't think about it in line with everything else, because you certainly do. But I just probably want to highlight the fact that this is the fourth part of the canvas. Again, you have to be talking to someone who has a problem and sees value in what you're looking to provide, and then be able to actually produce a solution that matches what they need, as opposed to just going, hey, I've built this really cool thing, I think it will help you. That isn't generally the best approach. So we want to make sure we're doing that. The other thing is around minimum viable product. If you build something that's got every bell and whistle that's going to solve all of these 1,000 things, you'll probably never get to market anyway, because you'll probably run out of money before you've got a customer. But also, you know, again, if you're pushing a product onto somebody with all of these things that don't necessarily align with what they're wanting to achieve, you've wasted your money in building it. So when we're creating something in the early stages, it has to do the job that the customer most cares about, with the smallest feature set. So if it's one thing and it needs to do one thing only, make sure it does that one thing. It also has to be able to be something that you can learn from. So if you are, you know, putting it out there, how can you get feedback? How can you, you know, engage in a conversation? Can you go out and be part of a demonstration? Can you, you know, track data? Can you track usage? How can you actually gather information to learn about how the person you've engaged with is actually using it, and get their, you know, verbal feedback is good, but real data is better. So how can you track that and build that into your MVP in some way as well? Because you only want to add or, you know, set features in to your final product if you know that they're actually adding value and the end customer is engaged with them. So this little triangle you may have seen before, but sometimes we'll see someone go, okay, my prototype, my minimum viable product, my pilot, my whatever, needs to function really well. That's not always the case, because if it functions but it's not reliable, or it's not convenient to use, or it isn't enjoyable to use, someone's not going to want to use it again anyway. So we've got to make sure that we've got a little slice of that pie that covers all those things, that it's still convenient, it's pleasurable, it's meaningful to them, it's usable, it's reliable, and it functions on this element that you're focused on. And again, the most important elements first, based on conversation and, you know, and the learnings that you have through that early stage of identifying the problem. And then, you know, you can grow across that triangle. You can spread that arc out further and add more things, but only if it's worth it. Because if you've put a feature in and people aren't using it, or maybe they use it once, but then they never come back and use it again, you need to understand why that is. You know, was it not enjoyable to use? Did it not work well? Did it not actually do the job? Did they realize that they don't actually need it? You know, why? And that learning is the most important part to then decide. And then, you know, this is what we sometimes also think of as a prototype, but it's not really. It's a, you know, it works in a way that, you know, if you can, what you're producing is going to be enormous and it's going to be expensive. And you know that from the beginning. Can you actually engage someone in a bit of storytelling first? And that might be drawing pictures for them. It could be drawing a picture of the experience. It could be, you know, visualizing it in some sort of, you know, two-dimensional way. It then may be going to something that is, you know, a little bit more something I can touch, something I can feel, something I start to see the scale of, you know, what does that look like, you know, all those types of things, before you then go and build this big, enormous, whatever it is. Because if you know, if I show you the picture and you're like, oh no, I want something with 3 masts, not 2 masts. It's like, okay, well, I need to redesign that now. And then, you know, I create the little model and it's like, okay, it's got 3 masts on it. Yes, that's what I wanted, but actually you've made it blue and I want it white. Okay, well, that's easy to fix. I can just paint it white. But if it's got, you know, something else on it, or doesn't have something else on it that I need, I can identify that now in this small, affordable way, as opposed to this giant, expensive way. So just thinking about how you can do that. And now with technology and, you know, storyboarding and creating, you know, 3D visual models and those sorts of things, there's a whole lot more scope, you know, 3D printing and all that sort of stuff. There's a whole lot more scope to be able to create something and do quick little iterations until everyone's sort of feeling a bit more comfortable before you actually go to scale as well. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. We talked about the validation board before, so introducing that solution into the conversation, but only after you know the problem is there. And again, you know, looking at those different ways of testing your assumptions, the same as in the first stage, you know, it's going to be different ways you can do that, but really thinking about how can I have this conversation to learn whether the assumptions I have are valid or not about my product, and you know, about the problems that I think this customer has and the pain points I think they have and what they want to achieve from it. And can I set some measures around that? Because if only one person cares and I've talked to 50, is that enough to take the next step forward? Or do I need to find another 5 people who care about that before I think it's actually worth working on? And again, setting those numbers for yourself gives you that benchmark to work to. It also helps you understand, what data do I need to collect? What feedback do I need to gather? How am I going to analyze that? And think about that at the beginning as well. And not to say that it can't evolve, but if you haven't thought about it and you're not collecting it, it's very hard to go back retrospectively and start to collect data that was never, you know, was never captured. So lots to think about, but that's what we're here for, is to work through that with you. And obviously we've got our mentors with us to have a little bit further conversation. So I am going to just give us all a couple of minute break. I realise we're a little bit past time, but it looks like our mentors have all joined us now. So thank you guys. So we'll just give everyone just, I know it says 5 minutes on there, but just say 2 to 3 minutes, just to have a quick break, stretch, grab a coffee, something like that, and then we'll drop back in